The crimson dust of Tyrannus V swirled in the late afternoon light, casting long shadows across the rocky desert terrain. Dr. Mira Zhang squinted through her protective goggles, adjusting the calibration on her motion sensors. The equipment was state-of-the-art, but nothing functioned quite as expected on this frontier world, where silicon-based life forms roamed landscapes humans had barely begun to understand. "Atmospheric interference again," she muttered to herself, tapping the display panel with a gloved finger. The readings fluctuated wildly, then stabilized. 3 weeks into her 6-month research expedition, and she was still battling the equipment as much as the hostile environment. Mira's mobile research station, little more than 3 reinforced canvas tents surrounded by a perimeter of sensor stakes, stood as the only human presence for 500 kilometers in any direction. The Tyrannus system had been discovered only 12 years earlier, and while corporate mining interests had already established preliminary operations on the more hospitable fourth planet, Tyrannus V remained largely unexplored, its unique ecosystem, dominated by apex predators rather than the usual pyramidal structure, had caught the attention of the Interplanetary Conservation Council. That's where Mira came in. As a wildlife ecologist specializing in predator dynamics, she had been granted the coveted research permit to study what the preliminary surveys had designated as hypercarnivores, creatures that seemed to occupy every ecological niche on this strange world. The mining corporations were impatient to expand operations to this mineral-rich planet, but conservation protocols demanded thorough biological surveys before any industrial activity could begin. Mira secured the last sensor stake and straightened, stretching her back after hours of crouching. The safety perimeter would alert her to any approaching lifeforms larger than her forearm, theoretically giving her enough time to retreat to the reinforced central tent if necessary. So far, she had observed the predators, mostly through drone footage and long-range scanners, maintaining the strict, non-interference protocols that governed all first-contact biological studies. "Base to Zhang, coming up on your scheduled check-in." The voice of Roland, the expedition's remote safety engineer, crackled through her comm unit. "Zhang here. Perimeter secure. Equipment functional," Mira responded, walking back toward her main tent. "Transmitting today's observation logs now." "Received. Any direct contact incidents to report?" "Negative. 3 sightings of mid-tier predators at the eastern ridge, well outside the perimeter. Behavior consistent with previous observations." "Good. Keep it that way. Doctor, remember, observation only." Mira suppressed a sigh. Roland was efficient but rigid in his interpretation of the protocols. "Understood. Zhang out." Inside her main tent, Mira removed her protective gear and settled at her workstation. The day's footage played across her screens, crimson-scaled creatures with 6 limbs stalking through the rocky terrain, their bodies low to the ground, muscles rippling beneath armored plates. They moved with the silent efficiency of perfect killing machines, yet displayed complex social behaviors that contradicted earlier theories about predator-dominant ecosystems. Mira's fascination with these creatures had begun years before she ever set foot on Tyrannus V. Her doctoral thesis on Earth's apex predators had challenged conventional wisdom about the intelligence and social structures of carnivorous species. When preliminary data from Tyrannus V began flowing in, suggesting an entire world where herbivores were almost non-existent, she had immediately applied for the research grant. What she had discovered in her 3 weeks on planet was even more extraordinary than she had anticipated. The creatures here existed in a complex hierarchy of predator and prey, but all were carnivores of different sizes. The ecosystem functioned through a delicate balance of predation and scavenging, with no plant consumption whatsoever. The vegetation, mostly silicon-based crystalline structures, seemed to exist solely to produce oxygen and provide shelter, untouched by the fauna. As night fell, Mira reviewed her notes one final time before powering down the non-essential equipment. The generator hummed softly in the background, powering the perimeter defenses and life support systems. Outside, the alien wind howled across the rocky landscape, carrying dust that pattered against the reinforced canvas like rain. Sleep came fitfully, as it always did on Tyrannus V. Mira's dreams were filled with crimson dust and gleaming eyes watching from the darkness. Morning arrived with the harsh light of the system's white star streaming through the tent's filtered windows. Mira performed her daily equipment checks, noting with satisfaction that all systems had remained stable through the night. Today's plan involved relocating one of her remote observation posts to track a new hunting territory she had identified through drone footage. After a quick breakfast of reconstituted protein and a stimulant tablet, she packed her field gear and set out, carefully logging her departure in the base's automated system. The protocol required her to stay within 2 kilometers of the base, maintaining constant communication with the safety systems. The observation post was just at the edge of this permitted radius, a calculated risk that Roland had reluctantly approved. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as Mira followed the narrow path between towering formations of red rock. Her exo boots compensated for the uneven footing, the servos whirring softly with each step. The atmospheric suit, lighter than the full pressure suits required on truly hostile worlds, still made movement cumbersome. But after weeks of practice, Mira had adapted to its limitations. She was halfway to the observation post when the first anomaly appeared on her scanner. A large heat signature, unlike any she had cataloged before, flickered at the edge of her detection range. It was beyond her permitted exploration zone, but the reading was too significant to ignore. Base, this is Zhang. I'm picking up an unusual signature approximately half a kilometer beyond the northeast boundary, requesting permission to investigate with drone reconnaissance. There was a pause before Roland's voice responded, heavy with disapproval. Negative. Dr. Zhang, the signature is outside your authorized zone. Log it for satellite tracking and return to your planned activities. Mira frowned at the scanner. The satellite pass isn't scheduled for another 3 days. This could be a new species classification. Possibly the apex predator we've theorized, but haven't confirmed. Protocol is clear, Doctor. No exceptions without full committee approval. Mira was about to argue further when a new reading caught her attention. Multiple smaller heat signatures were now converging on the larger one, moving with purpose. Base, I'm observing what appears to be coordinated hunting behavior. Multiple Class B predators surrounding a larger entity. All the more reason to maintain your distance, Doctor, Roland replied. Your safety is paramount. We can dispatch a specialized drone from the orbital platform if necessary. That would take hours to authorize and deploy, Mira said, already calculating. The observation would be invaluable. No one had yet documented predator-on-predator pack hunting on Tyrannus V. I'm sending up a surveillance drone. Strictly observation, no interference. Before Roland could object further, Mira launched the small drone from her pack. The device shot upward, its tiny engines whining as it ascended to 200 meters and moved toward the heat signatures. Within moments, its camera feed appeared on Mira's wrist display. What she saw made her breath catch. A massive creature, easily 3 times the size of any predator she had previously documented, stood with its back to a rock formation. Blood, dark and viscous, oozed from a wound in its hind leg, staining the crimson earth beneath it an even deeper shade. Surrounding it in a half-circle were 7 smaller predators, their scaled bodies tense with anticipation. The large creature, Mira mentally classified it as a Class A apex, roared, the sound carrying across the desert even to her position. Its body was covered in interlocking plates of armor, glinting like polished obsidian in the harsh sunlight. 6 powerful limbs ended in claws that could likely shred through the reinforced material of her tent with minimal effort. But what struck Mira most were its eyes, 4 of them, positioned for perfect stereoscopic vision. glowing with a bioluminescence that seemed almost intelligent in its intensity. "Base, are you seeing this?" Mira whispered, knowing the drone was transmitting the footage back to Roland. "Affirmative," came the tense reply. "Fascinating specimen, but this confirms you should maintain maximum distance. That creature could tear through a transport vehicle, let alone an atmospheric suit." Mira watched as one of the smaller predators lunged forward, only to be batted away by a lightning-fast strike from the apex predator. But the movement seemed to cost it tremendous effort. The wound was clearly debilitating, and the blood loss substantial. "It's injured," Mira said, more to herself than to Roland. "And outnumbered." "Not our concern, Doctor. Nature takes its course. Non-interference is absolute." Mira knew he was right. The prime directive of all first-contact biological studies was observation without intervention. The natural processes of an alien ecosystem, especially one as delicately balanced as Tyrannus V, could not be disrupted by human sentiment or curiosity. And yet, as she watched the smaller predators begin another coordinated attack, something within her rebelled against the cold calculation of scientific detachment. This wasn't just any predator, if her theory was correct. This was the true apex of Tyrannus V, perhaps even a keystone species that regulated the entire predator hierarchy. Its loss could have cascading effects throughout the ecosystem she was trying to understand. That was the rational justification her mind constructed. But in truth, something deeper drove her next decision, something primal that connected her, a human scientist, to this alien apex predator fighting for its life. "I'm moving closer," she announced, already striding forward. "Dr. Zhang, I must strenuously object." "Log your objection. Roland, I'm proceeding with caution." She muted the incoming audio, but left the channel open so he could monitor the situation. Mira moved swiftly across the rocky terrain, her mind racing through options. Direct intervention would be suicidal, even injured. The apex predator could kill her instantly, and the smaller hunters would certainly attack any newcomer. But she carried a sonic deterrent device, designed to emit frequencies that the preliminary studies had shown were painful to Tyrannus V's fauna. As she approached the ridge overlooking the standoff, Mira could now hear the growls and hisses of the smaller predators. They were circling more tightly now, emboldened by the apex's weakening state. The large creature's bioluminescent eyes seemed dimmer, its massive chest heaving with exertion. Mira activated the sonic device, setting it to its highest frequency. The effect was immediate. The smaller predators recoiled, their heads swinging around in confusion and discomfort. She increased the intensity, and they began to retreat, their hunting formation disintegrating. Within minutes, they had disappeared into the rocky landscape, leaving the wounded apex predator alone. Its massive form now slumped against the rock formation. Its 4 eyes scanned the ridge until they locked onto Mira's position. For a moment, that seemed to stretch into eternity. Human and alien predator stared at one another across the gulf of evolutionary divergence. Then, to Mira's astonishment, the creature lowered its armored head in what almost appeared to be a gesture of acknowledgement before collapsing fully onto its side. "Base," Mira said, reactivating the audio channel. "The smaller predators have retreated. The apex specimen is severely wounded and has lost consciousness. I'm going to approach and assess." Roland's voice came back immediately, nearly shouting. "Absolutely not! Dr. Zhang, you are explicitly ordered to return to base immediately. This is a critical protocol violation." "It will die without intervention," Mira replied calmly, already descending the ridge. "And I believe this may be the only specimen of its kind we've encountered. The potential knowledge loss is unacceptable." "Your life is not worth this data, Doctor. The committee will have my position for even allowing this conversation to continue." "Then log your formal objection and monitor my vital signs," Mira said, I'm proceeding. She approached the fallen giant with methodical caution. Sonic device in one hand, medical scanner in the other. Up close, the creature was even more impressive, nearly 5 meters from snout to tail, with musculature that spoke of incredible power. The wound on its hind leg was deep, possibly from a territorial dispute with another of its kind, or perhaps from one of the jagged rock formations that dotted the landscape. Mira set down her pack and extracted the emergency medical kit. It contained supplies intended for human physiology, but certain principles of trauma care were universal. Stop the bleeding, prevent infection, promote healing. The scanner indicated that the creature's biology utilized copper-based blood, not entirely dissimilar to some earth mollusks, but vastly more complex. "I'm applying a hemostatic compound to the wound," she narrated for the base recording. "The creature remains unconscious, but shows stable life signs." As she worked, Mira maintained a running commentary of her observations, partly for the scientific record, and partly to justify her actions to the inevitable inquiry that would follow this protocol breach. The wound was deep but clean, and the bleeding slowed significantly after the application of the hemostatic gel. She then covered the area with a synthetic bandage designed to adapt to the host's biology. She was just securing the bandage when the creature's eyes suddenly flashed open, all four blazing with bioluminescent intensity. Mira froze, her hand still on the creature's leg, certain that her life was about to end. The apex predator raised its massive head, those glowing eyes fixed on her with an intelligence that sent shivers down her spine. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of serrated teeth capable of shearing through bone, and Mira braced herself for the attack. Instead, the creature simply observed her, its breathing steady despite the obvious pain it must have been experiencing. After what felt like an eternity, it lowered its head once more, its eyes still watching her, but making no move to attack. "Base," Mira whispered, hardly believing what was happening. "The specimen is conscious and tolerating my presence. I'm continuing treatment." Roland's voice came back, subdued now. "Dr. Zhang, this is unprecedented behavior. Are you certain it's not simply too weak to attack?" "Negative," Mira replied, watching as the creature adjusted its position to allow her better access to the wound. "It's demonstrating what appears to be intentional cooperation." Continuing to document. Over the next hour, Mira completed her treatment of the wound, all while the massive predator remained remarkably docile. When she finally stepped back, packing away her supplies, the creature rose to its feet with surprising grace despite its injury. It towered over her, its armored head nearly 3 meters from the ground, casting her in its shadow. Mira stood perfectly still, medical kit clutched in her hands, as the apex predator took a step toward her. It lowered its head until its face was level with hers, those bioluminescent eyes studying her with what she could only interpret as curiosity. Then, with a sound that seemed almost like a rumbling purr, it turned and began to move away, its gait slightly awkward due to the bandaged leg. "It's leaving," Mira reported, relief and a strange disappointment mingling in her voice. "Heading northeast, moving well despite the injury." "Return to base immediately, Doctor," Roland ordered. "A full incident report will need to be filed, and the committee will want to review all footage." "Acknowledged. Returning now." As Mira gathered her equipment and began the journey back to her research station, she frequently glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the massive predator following her. But the rocky landscape remained empty, the only movement the ever-present swirl of crimson dust. By the time she reached the perimeter of her base, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the desert. Mira entered her main tent and immediately transferred all data from her equipment to the secure servers, knowing that every second of her encounter would be scrutinized by the committee. "Base to Zhang." Roland's voice came through the communication system. The committee has been notified of today's events. They're convening an emergency session to determine the appropriate response. Understood, Mira replied, removing her atmospheric suit and setting it in the decontamination chamber. Will I be ordered to evacuate? There was a pause before Roland answered. Unknown at this time. The breach is serious, but your footage, it's unlike anything we've seen in xenobiology. They may want more data before making a determination. The creature would have died, Mira said simply. I couldn't let that happen. That wasn't your decision to make. Doctor, Roland's voice was gentle but firm. Get some rest. We'll speak again after the committee meeting. Mira nodded, though Roland couldn't see her, and shut down the communication system. She knew he was right. The non-interference protocol existed for good reasons. Humanity's history of colonization on Earth had demonstrated all too clearly how even well-intentioned interventions could devastate delicate ecosystems. Yet, as she prepared a simple meal from her ration supplies, Mira couldn't bring herself to regret her actions. The connection she had felt with the apex predator went beyond scientific curiosity. In those glowing eyes, she had recognized something, a sentience, perhaps not like human consciousness, but awareness nonetheless. As night fell, Mira reviewed her notes and prepared her formal statement for the committee. The wind outside grew stronger, howling around the reinforced tents and carrying the sounds of distant creatures. She found herself straining to distinguish the calls, wondering if she might recognize the roar of the apex predator among them. Sleep eluded her entirely that night. Every sound from outside the tent brought her to full alertness, her mind replaying the encounter over and over. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the tent's windows, Mira had resigned herself to the likelihood that she would be recalled from the expedition. Her research terminated prematurely due to her breach of protocol. She was preparing her morning coffee when the perimeter alarm sounded, a soft, pulsing tone indicating a large life form approaching the sensor boundary. Mira quickly moved to her monitoring station, calling up the external camera feeds. What she saw made her coffee cup slip from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The apex predator stood just outside the perimeter, its massive form unmistakable even in the dim morning light. The synthetic bandage was still in place on its hind leg, and it moved with more confidence than the previous day, suggesting the treatment had been effective. As Mira watched, the creature settled onto the ground, positioning itself with a clear view of the main tent entrance. It made no attempt to breach the perimeter, simply lying there like some enormous sentinel. Base to Jang. Roland's voice came urgently through the comm. Are you seeing this? The Class A specimen has returned to your location. I see it, Mira confirmed, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. It appears to be guarding the perimeter. This is unprecedented, Roland said, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his concern for protocol. No predator species has ever demonstrated protective behavior toward humans in any first contact situation. Mira moved closer to the tent's transparent section, studying the massive creature. It's not just protective behavior, it's reciprocity. I assisted it, and now it's returning the favor. That would indicate a level of cognitive function far beyond what we anticipated in Tyrannosphere fauna. Roland mused. The committee needs to see this immediately. Throughout that day, the apex predator remained at its post outside Mira's research station. When smaller predators approached, drawn perhaps by the scent of human presence, the massive creature would rise to its full height, emitting a roar that sent them scurrying back into the rocky landscape. When no threats were present, it would return to its resting position, those bioluminescent eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Mira spent the day documenting every movement, every behavior, capturing detailed footage for the committee. By midday, word had spread through the scientific channels, and her communication system was flooded with incoming queries from researchers across the system. The committee has reached a preliminary decision, Roland informed her, late in the afternoon. Your breach of protocol is noted, but in light of the unprecedented behavioral data being gathered, you are authorized to continue your research with additional safety parameters. And the apex specimen? Mira asked, glancing toward where the massive predator still maintained its vigilant watch. You are authorized to continue observation but not further direct contact unless absolutely necessary for your safety, Roland replied. A specialized research team is being assembled to join you within the week. Until then, maintain your distance and standard protocols. Mira acknowledged the instructions, but as she watched the creature outside, now illuminated by the setting sun, its armor plates gleaming like polished obsidian, she knew that the relationship had already transcended standard protocols. Something extraordinary had begun with her decision to intervene, something that challenged the very foundations of interspecies interaction theory. As darkness fell once more, Mira expected the apex predator to leave, to return to its hunting grounds or territory. Instead, it remained, its bioluminescent eyes glowing more brightly in the darkness, a beacon of alien sentience in the hostile landscape. That night, for the first time since arriving on Tyrannus V, Mira slept deeply and without interruption, the knowledge of her guardian's presence outside providing a security that no perimeter defense could match. The following days established a routine that Mira meticulously documented for the scientific record. Each morning, she would emerge from her tent to find the apex predator in its now customary position. It would acknowledge her with a slight movement of its armored head, sometimes rising to follow her at a respectful distance as she performed her research tasks within the permitted exploration zone. Mira began referring to the creature as Guardian in her notes, though she knew the committee would frown upon such anthropomorphization. The name seemed fitting, however, as the massive predator's protective behavior extended beyond merely keeping other creatures away from the research station. On the third day after their initial encounter, Mira was collecting mineral samples near a rock formation when the ground beneath her suddenly shifted. A minor seismic event, common on Tyrannus V, had destabilized the formation. Before she could react, Guardian appeared beside her, using its massive body to shield her from falling debris, sustaining several impacts that would have seriously injured or killed her. It deliberately put itself in harm's way to protect me, Mira reported to Roland afterward, her voice still shaking from the experience. That goes beyond instinctual behavior or simple reciprocity. This is complex reasoning. Roland's response was measured, but Mira could hear the excitement beneath his professional tone. The committee is reviewing all footage in real time now. Dr. Zhang, you may have discovered the first documented case of interspecies altruism on a non-Earth world. The implications are significant. Significant was an understatement. If Guardian's behavior represented a genuine capacity for cross-species empathy, it would revolutionize xenobiology and force a re-evaluation of countless first-contact protocols. More immediately, it raised ethical questions about the planned mining operations on Tyrannus V, operations that would inevitably disrupt the habitat of these remarkable creatures. By the fifth day, Mira had begun to notice subtle communications developing between herself and Guardian. The creature had different vocalizations for different situations, a low rumble that seemed to indicate contentment, a sharp, clicking sound when it detected something of interest, and a distinctive hiss that served as warning before its more aggressive displays toward encroaching predators. In turn, Guardian seemed to recognize certain words and tones in Mira's speech, responding most notably to its name and to phrases like good and thank you that she found herself using instinctively despite the scientific impropriety. I believe we're developing a rudimentary communication system, she told Roland during her evening report. Nothing like language, but a mutual recognition of significant sounds and their associated meanings. Fascinating, Roland replied. his initial disapproval now completely replaced by scientific enthusiasm. The specialized team arrives tomorrow. They've been briefed on your observations and are bringing additional monitoring equipment to document the communication patterns. Mira acknowledged the information, though with a touch of apprehension. Her time alone with Guardian had established a delicate trust, and she worried that the arrival of additional humans might disrupt the balance they had achieved. That night, a massive dust storm swept across the desert, more severe than any Mira had experienced during her time on Tyrannus V. The reinforced tents groaned under the assault of wind and debris, the perimeter sensors flickering as their power fluctuated. Guardian had disappeared earlier in the evening, perhaps sensing the approaching storm and seeking more substantial shelter. Mira monitored the weather systems from her workstation, calculating that the storm would pass by morning. The research station was designed to withstand such events, though the external equipment would likely need extensive cleaning and recalibration afterward. She was preparing for bed when the perimeter alarm sounded, not the gentle pulse that indicated Guardian's presence, but the harsh, insistent blare of a security breach. Mira rushed to the monitoring station to find the external cameras nearly blind with swirling dust. What little she could see sent a chill through her body. Multiple heat signatures surrounded the research station, moving with purpose through the storm. Not Guardian, but the smaller predators, at least a dozen of them, circling like wolves around a campfire. Somehow, they had determined that the storm provided cover for an attack, their usual fear of the perimeter defenses overcome by the opportunity the conditions presented. "Base, this is Zhang," Mira called urgently into the comm system. "Multiple hostile contacts surrounding the station. Perimeter defenses may be compromised by the storm." Static was her only answer. The storm was interfering with communications. She was on her own. A loud, tearing sound came from the equipment tent, followed by the crash of falling gear. They had breached the perimeter, using the storm as cover to dig beneath the defenses. Mira grabbed the sonic deterrent device and her emergency sidearm, a last resort weapon she had never expected to use, and moved toward the main tent's sealed entrance. Through the transparent section, she could see dark shapes moving through the dust, their scaled bodies low to the ground, approaching the main tent with predatory focus. The sonic device might drive some away, but in these numbers, with the storm muffling its effectiveness, Mira knew her chances were slim. She was about to activate the emergency beacon, a signal that would bring an orbital response team, ending her research but potentially saving her life, when a different sound cut through the howling wind. A roar of such power and ferocity that Mira felt it in her chest cavity, a sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Guardian had returned. Through the swirling dust, Mira watched as a massive shape tore into the circle of predators, scattering them with swipes of enormous clawed limbs. Guardian fought with controlled fury, positioning itself between the attackers and the main tent at all times, roaring challenges that even the storm couldn't diminish. The smaller predators regrouped and attacked as one, leaping onto Guardian's armored back and flanks, seeking vulnerable points. But the apex predator seemed prepared for this tactic, rolling suddenly to crush those clinging to its side, then rising again to face the next wave. Mira knew she should remain safely inside, but as she saw Guardian beginning to tire, surrounded by too many opponents, she made another decision that defied protocol, sealing her atmospheric suit and activating the sonic device at its highest setting. She stepped out into the storm. The effect was immediate. The closest predators recoiled from the sonic assault, their hunting formation disrupted once more. Guardian seized the opportunity, tearing into the confused attackers with renewed vigor. Within moments, the survivors were retreating into the storm, disappearing as quickly as they had come. Guardian turned toward Mira, its massive form heaving with exertion, fresh wounds visible on its armored hide. For a moment, they stood facing each other in the heart of the dust storm, human and alien predator, connected by something that transcended biology and evolution. Then, Guardian stepped forward and did something that Mira would struggle to explain in her subsequent reports. It lowered its massive head and gently nudged her back toward the tent entrance, a clear and unmistakable gesture of protection and concern. Once Mira was safely inside, Guardian took up position directly before the entrance, its massive body blocking any approach, those bioluminescent eyes glowing through the swirling dust like beacons in the darkness. The storm raged throughout the night, but no further attacks came. By morning, the winds had subsided, leaving the landscape transformed by new drifts of crimson dust. Mira emerged cautiously to find Guardian still at its post, wounds crusted with dark fluid but otherwise alert and vigilant. "You need treatment," she said softly, retrieving her medical kit. To her amazement, Guardian lowered itself to the ground, presenting its injured flank to her with what could only be described as trust. As she worked to clean and treat the wounds, more carefully now, with a better understanding of the creature's biology, Mira heard the distant hum of approaching transport engines. The specialized research team had arrived, their timing either fortunate or unfortunate, depending on one's perspective. "Their colleagues," Mira told Guardian, gesturing toward the approaching vehicles. "Friends, like me." Guardian watched the horizon with obvious wariness, but remained at her side, neither retreating nor displaying aggression as the transports drew closer. The first vehicle crested the ridge, followed by two others, standard research transports, bearing the insignia of the Interplanetary Conservation Council. They slowed as they approached, clearly having spotted the massive predator standing beside the human researcher. The lead transport stopped 50 meters away, and a voice came through Mira's comm system, no longer Roland, but someone with greater authority. "Dr. Zhang, this is Director Esposito. We're observing your situation. Is the creature hostile? Do you require emergency extraction?" Mira looked at Guardian, then back at the transports. "Negative, Director. This is the apex specimen I've been documenting. It poses no threat to me or to the team, provided we maintain appropriate respect for its space." There was a long pause before the director responded. "We've reviewed your footage and reports. Dr. Zhang, while your initial protocol breach was serious, the data you've gathered is, well, it's revolutionary. The committee has authorized a significant expansion of your research parameters." Relief washed over Mira. "And Guardian, the apex specimen." "That will be the central focus of the expanded research," Director Esposito replied. "If this creature is indeed demonstrating cross-species altruism and rudimentary communication, as your data suggests, it represents a watershed moment in xenobiology." Over the next hours, the research team carefully established their presence, setting up additional equipment and expanded living quarters under Mira's guidance and Guardian's watchful eyes. The massive predator remained wary of the newcomers, but seemed to accept them as extensions of Mira's presence. Director Esposito, a veteran xenobiologist with decades of field experience, could barely contain his excitement as he observed Guardian's behavior firsthand. "In 30 years of studying alien life forms, I've never seen anything like this," he told Mira as they watched Guardian patrol the expanded perimeter. "The implications for evolutionary theory alone." "It goes beyond science," Mira said quietly. "When I look into those eyes, I see something. Kindred, different. Yes, but connected somehow." Esposito nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's the most significant discovery of all. That connection can form across such vast evolutionary divides. It challenges everything we thought we knew about consciousness and its recognition." In the days that followed, the expanded research team documented every aspect of Guardian's behavior, from its protective patterns to its increasing comfort with human presence. They established with certainty that it was the only specimen of its kind within a 500-kilometer radius, suggesting either extreme territorial requirements or a dangerously low population density. The mining corporations, initially frustrated by the research extension, were gradually won over by the public relations value of the discovery. The Sentinel of Tyrannus V became a sensation throughout human space, with Guardian's image appearing in news feeds and scientific journals across a dozen worlds. For Mira, however, the relationship remained deeply personal. Each morning, Guardian would greet her with that same rumbling purr she had first heard in the desert. Each evening, it would take up its position outside her tent, a living shield against the dangers of this alien world. 1 month after the expanded team's arrival, Mira sat beside Guardian under the stars, recording her observations as the massive creature dozed beside her. The formal scientific designation for its species had been established: Custos Tyrannus. Guardian of Tyrannus, with Mira's discovery credited in the taxonomic record. "We've learned so much from you," she said softly, knowing that Guardian couldn't understand her words but recognizing that it responded to her tone. "And we've barely scratched the surface." Guardian's eyes opened, those bioluminescent orbs fixing on her, with what Mira had come to recognize as affection, or something very like it. The massive predator shifted slightly, moving its armored head to rest gently against her side, in a gesture that still amazed the research team with its delicacy and apparent intent. Director Esposito approached, careful to maintain the respectful distance that Guardians seemed to prefer with humans other than Mira. "The committee has made their final determination," he said, his expression serious, but not somber. "Tyrannus V has been designated a protected biosphere. No mining operations will be permitted for at least 50 years, pending complete ecological surveys and population assessments of all major species." Mira nodded, relief washing over her. "And our research?" "Extended indefinitely," Esposito replied with a smile. "You've opened a door, Dr. Zhang. What lies beyond it may change our understanding of life itself." As the director departed, Mira returned her attention to Guardian, whose massive form seemed even more impressive under the alien stars. The creature that might have killed her on that first day now slept beside her tent each night, a living embodiment of the connection possible between different forms of consciousness. "We have so much more to learn from each other," Mira whispered, placing her hand gently on Guardian's armored head. The massive predator rumbled contentedly, its bioluminescent eyes dimming slightly in what she had come to recognize as relaxation. Around them, the crimson desert stretched into darkness, a landscape of harsh beauty and hidden wonders. Somewhere in that vastness, perhaps other Custos Tyrannus roamed, solitary, powerful, but with the capacity for connection that transcended the expected boundaries of predator and prey. Mira had come to Tyrannus V, seeking scientific knowledge, and had found something far more profound. A reminder that life, in all its diverse forms across the cosmos, might share more than merely the chemistry of existence. In Guardian's eyes, she had glimpsed something universally recognizable despite the gulf of evolution and origin: the capacity to reach across difference and find kinship. As the night deepened, Guardian shifted closer, its massive body providing warmth against the growing chill. Mira leaned against its armored side, continuing her notes as the stars wheeled overhead. Human and alien predator, researcher and subject, yet somehow also simply companions under the same alien sky. The committee would want empirical data, measurable outcomes, quantifiable results. But Mira knew that the most significant discovery on Tyrannus V could never be fully captured in scientific notation or taxonomic classification. It lived in moments like this: predator and potential prey, resting side by side in mutual trust, defying every expectation of what was possible across the boundaries of worlds. Guardian rumbled softly, eyes scanning the horizon once more before settling back into its protective vigilance. Tomorrow would bring new observations, new data, new understanding. But for tonight, the simple reality was enough. She had found the predator surrounded and snarling, and now it slept outside her tent like a guard dog, a bridge between worlds that no one had imagined possible. The crimson dust of Tyrannus V swirled in the night breeze, carrying the distant calls of alien life. But here, in this small circle of human presence, on an untamed world, something extraordinary had taken root, a connection that promised to reshape humanity's understanding of consciousness itself, one careful observation at a time. And it had begun with a single choice, a moment of compassion that crossed the boundaries of species and worlds. As Mira drifted toward sleep, Guardian's massive presence beside her, she knew that whatever scientific discoveries lay ahead, this connection, this trust, this bridge between different forms of awareness, would remain the true miracle of Tyrannus V. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the ancient secrets of this alien world, and beneath the foreign stars, human and Guardian rested together, different in form and origin, yet somehow kindred in the vast, unfathomable tapestry of cosmic life.